Ruler School is brought to you by Happy Little Hug Factory and these amazing patrons. Extra special thank you to guest lecturer patron Brody Harris. Thank you for your support. Enjoy the video. Hey there everybody, this is DMO73 welcoming you back once again after a long week of Force of Will to the Teacher's Lounge. As always, I am joined by Ryan Miles.
Hey everybody.
Brandan Bremont.
Hello.
And Frank Klosser.
Hi-yo.
We are here to have some fun, and we are going to talk about some pretty interesting topics that we missed up last week. First things first, though, we talked about last week how we would be joined by one of our patrons, Brody Harris. He has decided to step out this week, so hopefully we'll hear back from him later, but we appreciate his support on the Patreon nonetheless. And just a quick little shout out, if you guys want to potentially participate in the Teacher's Lounge, go support the channel on Patreon and get access to that perk. But our first topic for tonight, new cluster, right? A new set just dropped, but as of always, we're constantly looking forward to the hype of the new cluster. New Valhalla cluster was announced on June 1st. ICV2 dropped us a cool article talking about a lot of stuff, and then Jeff in his live stream answered a few questions about it. So I'm going to quickly go over the information, and then we have some topics I'd like to kind of talk about. So New Dawn Rises is the first set of the new cluster. It is going to release on September 7th with 5 new structure decks: Light, Water, Wind, and Darkness, and Fire. And then the new set will also be coming out the week later, so on September 14th. And that set's going to have 110 cards. Still have God art or God packs. Not sure on Ubers though, and that's because there are going to be no rulers in booster sets. Instead, the 5 starter decks are going to come each with 2 rulers, and so that's interestingly enough. Those will be the rulers for the 10 clusters, or the 10 rulers for the full cluster. And then we're going to have these new cards called runes. Some of them will be specifically related to certain rulers or certain colors, and we learned a few other things from Jeff, which I'll go over, but these rune cards will be the kind of new customization piece that get added to the new sets to help kind of spice up previous decks as new sets come out. Interestingly enough, each of the new starters is going to come with enough cards so that you can break it into 2 mini decks, so that you can just immediately build 2 small decks there and play with your friends. And then ultimately what we learned from Jeff is that the runes are going to, some of them have restrictions to be put in a rune deck, some of them have restrictions to be put in a main deck, and a lot of them have restrictions as to terms of which rulers you can use them in combination with. And then those runes that will be printed in future sets will be tweaked and modified based on competitive events. So to kind of change maybe what effects go where, or what rulers get access to certain runes based on how things are going in the competitive circuit. So there's a lot of information there to process. Kind of before we get into the questions, I guess, any first thoughts from anyone in the room? Ryan?
I think it's pretty interesting. I'm thinking about like the fact that we're losing access to a lot of the dual color rulers from the Lapis cluster. That was like most of the 2-color rulers in New Frontiers are in that cluster. So if the runes do have like specific attribute ruler restrictions, those are actually going to be pretty restricting like deck building conditions than you would think given the current New Frontiers format.
Okay. Brandon, any first thoughts?
So we're definitely missing a lot of information, right? Like, we don't really know what these runes do. We don't know, how strict these restrictions are going to be, if it's just going to be like fire ruler, or specifically, the name of one of the fire rulers or something like that. And so we'll definitely have to give our thoughts when more information comes out, but I'm optimistic. I really like when decks have a select few cards that are specific to that ruler, because it helps new players get into the game with taking off some of the burden of deck building. But yeah, we really have to see just how impactful these cards are.
And Frank?
My first thought on this is simply, this is what I thought sealed items would be back when they first spoiled all the sealed rulers, almost a year ago now. But I'm also tentatively excited. The other thing is it gives, like, if it works the way we expect, or just is cohesive, it continues the trend we started with this cluster where the lower ruler count means that they get to focus more on printing cards that, like, they can support existing rulers, and it leaves them a lot of design space in the set to support existing rulers rather than, like, you know, oh, we're in set 3 of the cluster, time to print 60% of our design space is just getting the 2 new rulers somehow playable even at locals level.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think my main excitement, I need to see a little bit where runes are going to sit, right? So, like, my first thought is, like, okay, I initially thought they were going to be something that just kind of, like, you pick a ruler, you pick a rune, and that's, like, the start of the game, right? But then upon hearing Jeff say that there's a rune deck, and maybe some go in the main deck, and stuff like that, I'm like, okay, so now I'm a little bit more confused about what these are. So I'm kind of like Brandon a little bit more, and I need to know what exactly they're going to be and how they're going to influence deck building. But as a concept, in terms of as the product's getting released and kind of stuff like that, I'm actually pretty excited. I think it could be a cool direction to go in. We just have to make sure that they're not 0 cost, you know, draw 4 cards or things like that.
I guess the one...
Or suddenly give your ruler, ruler regardless of color, swiftness, imperishable, flying, drain, and precision. You know.
I guess the one worry I have with them is that by trying to make the rulers customizable with runes, they'll go too far and make the rulers for this set a little bland. So, like, we'll have a cool, flavorful ruler that is almost as generic as, like, the draft rulers were this set. So it's, like, all flavor, but then it's runes that determine what it actually does. I'd still like to see each of the 10 be, like, pseudo-unique and then customizable on top of that.
Yeah,
I think an additional worry that I have on top of that is if the runes do have their own deck of cards, or if they start in the ruler area, without going into, like, too much Force of Will history, one of the biggest problems with, like, Force of Will metas that have been really restrictive is too much consistency. Like, when rulers provide too much consistency to gameplay, like Reflect and Scheherazade, and it creates an unfun environment. And so if the runes are going to do that, then I'm a little bit nervous, and I'm really hoping that we don't see that, but that's kind of a concern of mine.
Yeah, that's fair.
I guess I'll be the one here, surprisingly, to talk about the limited format impact, right? So the structure deck rulers and, like, the draft rulers from this set were actually pretty cool and pretty interesting for the first 2 sets. And then they printed a ruler named Scheherazade, and then, you know, 20% of the set was just unplayable garbage because it was so dedicated to supporting that one ruler's mechanic. So if you get all the rulers out of the way at the beginning of the set, I think it becomes a lot easier to design a limited set. And maybe we won't have that problem the next time around.
True enough.
I guess I should also say in a response to that,
like printing.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
It opens up options like if we were to say we had Scheherazade with less abilities, but, like, the Grimoire was one of her big runes when you drew her. You could have, like, for draft, you could have, like, common and uncommon runes that just gave you some functionality of legend that you got to staple to whatever the draft rulers for the set would be.
Yeah.
So there's definitely some interest in, like, I hadn't really thought about how the runes interact with limited yet.
We'll have to see. The interesting thing to note would be that it was also revealed by Jeff on his stream that with the new cluster, we are going to get new draft rulers, and there are 3. Right. Specifically, there are 3 draft rulers. We don't know anything about them. We don't know what their effects are going to be. We don't know anything. I imagine they are probably going to also introduce with those maybe some draft runes, some, like, really basic, like a set of 5 really basic runes. Based on kind of what the runes look like. I think that would be smart, right? But we'd have to see kind of what those basic rulers and what the runes themselves are going to kind of do.
I imagine they would have to be, like, not color restricted in some capacity for that to happen.
Well,
right.
that or, right. I mean, I guess so. This is wild conjecture, but the odd number could also imply that the first set is going to, like, balance itself around a set of, like, color combinations. And so you have, like, say, 3 draft rulers who are all, like, supporting a faction, so to speak, that's in a 3-color combination.
None of which are green.
I went in the opposite direction, and I sort of figured that all 3 of the rulers have to be colorless, right? Like, I'm thinking that we're going to get, like, 3 different clockwork furnaces, like maybe one that's, like, aggressive, one that's mid-range, and one that's control, and that's kind of how they, like, broke it up. I don't know.
Yeah, that also could be how it is. and we'll have to see. Ultimately, I think it could be pretty exciting. I mainly would be fine with this idea of having a like archetype style draft ruler, kind of like you're saying, like an aggressive, a mid-range, and a control. Simply because, like in the current draft format, have any of you legitimately walked into a pod and been like, you know what, the ruler to play here is most definitely Leaf Elder?
More so in this most recent one. But
really?
in general, well, yeah, there's a lot of elemental support in this set, and almost no like rain support or gem support. So Leaf Elder like actually gets a little bit better, but otherwise,
like for the pretty much the entire cluster,
right?
Leaf Elder of one of the four
of course.
has been like, I guess I'm just gonna play this because I have a bunch of green stuff.
Even then,
it'll be
you
interesting.
grab your like random, grab your random like mystery payoff and just play off-color ruler for that payoff.
Of course.
Yep.
Right, exactly. So I'm excited to see this breakdown into 3 if it is kind of directed at like deck style, so we could probably see them a little bit more variety in those events.
Now that I didn't know there was only 3 rulers, but like in my head I'm imagining colorless rulers that J-activate for like 4 colorless mana. One of them says pay 2 mana, deal 500 damage to a Resonator. One says pay 500, draw a card. One says pay 500, I don't know, subscribe to a YouTube channel, for crying out loud. Like, I mean, I can't even think of what the third one's gonna be off the top of my head, but like that's like they're all gonna have like the exact same like flavor, the exact same judgment cost, exact same toughness attack, and then they're gonna have some activated ability on the ruler side that like lends itself to some kind of deck building. And I think one's gonna be clearly better than the others.
So what if one of them was like 4 mana judge and it's just a 15/15 vanilla on one side, one judges and it's a 10/10 with like first strike and when it enters draw a card. One's a 5/5 that has some ridiculous ability, and then like that's the breakdown.
That would be fine. Yeah, I think they're gonna that's the kind of thing they're gonna go for.
So I think that was almost. I mean, I think that they experimented with that idea of trading stats for effects. Oddly enough, before in the past with the Chimera, but that's a conversation for a different day. If you actually look at the 3 Chimera, it's very clear that you pay for every effect that a creature has. They pulled 300 of from its stat line.
I don't know, man. Griffin has way too much attack and defense.
Don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. It's still insanely good. Like there was definitely a failure of balance in those, right? And we can go down that line way later. But like if you actually look at the 3 based on the types of effects and kind of like the utility of each one and the stat line for every utility effect, they tried to do this correctly. They failed, where it was like they spend some stats to give it something effect-wise. They did it badly because Griffin is broken.
I'm just imagining like the forcible design room. They've experimented
with that idea before.
Where they print Amit. They're like, all right, 15/15. This is our 700. This is our 7 cost guy. He's gonna kill a guy and he's gonna gain life. That's 2 whole effects. Absolutely broken. All right, next guy. This is gonna be Griffin. All right. He's gonna be a 12/12 because we want him to compete with Gwyber, right? And then let's see. What does green do? Green calls stones. Let's let him call a stone. Actually, you sack a stone, so he'll call 2. And then, all right. I mean, that's only 1 effect, and he's still like kind of weak. I guess we'll give him flying because he's a green card. So yeah, all right, that makes sense. And then Manicore. What's Manicore gonna do? You know, make him a 9/9. He can fly 2 because we already gave that to Griffin, so we have to be consistent. And then, do we want him to have any impact on the board whatsoever? Yeah. Okay, he can kill additions. That makes sense. And then I guess he can look at the hand too. That's fine. All right, cool. Ship it. That's that's how I imagine that throne going down.
Okay, so rather than
note, we're going to a Norse themed play or Norse themed set, and they're going to do 3. I'm betting that it will be the Norns for our starter deck rulers.
I see.
Or something inspired by the Norns.
Are you saying for the draft rulers or the actual starter deck rulers?
No, for the draft. Sorry, for the draft rulers. For like just the flavor of the draft rulers, they're the Norns.
And for those who might be confused by what the Norns are.
Okay, I'm sorry, I don't know Norse mythology at all.
They're the Norse goddesses of fate. They're a triple goddess thing. So there's the basically of the past, present, and future. And
is it Erdskull Berdandi essentially?
Yeah, those are their names.
We've already had Erdskull and Berdandi though.
Yeah, but
maybe they come back.
Maybe they're all red rulers. Sure. And they're not colorless at all.
That's great. I love it.
Okay.
All right.
So one of the main things that I kind of wanted to talk about with this set, with the new specifically, because I don't think we can really talk too much about deck building and stuff, since we don't really know how runes are going to really impact things, is the model for acquisition of cards. Right now that we've got this new idea of the structures have the rulers in it and everything else. So how do you guys think in terms of current players who are in the game and you have been for a while and pretty well established and that kind of stuff, what do you guys kind of see as the impact, or is there any impact, or how do you feel about this new change to heavy influence on the structure decks with the sets then directly kind of supporting that and not having the rulers? And anybody can kind of jump in.
I'm gonna pass.
So
my
not talking about like secondary market impact, 'cause I don't actually know anything about that. I think it's a good change beyond that. I like what one of you mentioned earlier about how the sets don't have to be focused on the individual rulers that come out. So like we don't have to have a Scheherazade that has like 20 Scheherazade support cards that are like dead outside of it. And I think that's a very positive change, because like for R3, when it came out and Scheherazade was just the best deck, you had to buy so much of that set in order to get all of the Scheherazade tools. Like I spend an awful lot of money on this game. Like I think a lot more than the average player, and because I support a bunch of my friends that play. And so when I went with a group to Minneapolis, I, for the first time ever, did not have enough cards to like build 3 Scheherazade decks, just because you had the entire thing was from R3 and you had to buy so much of it. And so I'm really excited that with this change you should not have that problem as often, because if you really like one of the starter deck rulers, there should be some support of that in is it V1? Is that what we're calling it? V1, V2, Valhalla?
I think it's V1, yeah.
Okay, so in like V1 you should have enough support for those starter deck rulers, and then you'll just continue to garner that support instead of just having like, oh, here's Scheherazade and here's all of her cards in R3.
So yeah, I really like it when decks don't build themselves and you have a bit more like agency as a player to like just find interesting combinations and interesting interactions, and just like build a deck that does that. I think the only deck that exists right now that kind of lets you do that really is like the Lumia and Imel decks, and Lumia is like a very, very poor example because you literally just search what cards have enter abilities, and then you just pick your favorite ones and put them in a deck. Imel's a bit more nuanced, but the last time we really had like a player like designed tier 1 deck, in my opinion, was like Alice's World, when you just took most consistent ruler, found a bunch of cool synergies with like Adam Brawley and then a bunch of 1-drops and Gwyber, and you threw Alice's World in there because you had so many 1-drops, Pumpkin Witch kind of stuff. Like that was the last like Teledad deck for the Yu-Gi-Oh players out there. It was the last deck where the players built it, found the broken interactions, and it was like understandable to be overlooked by the company. But nowadays you have Kirik. It's like, okay, let me just put in a bunch of Battle Arts and red guys. It's like, okay, Scheherazade, literally just doll tribal with stories and like legend degeneracy. Like the last Priscia, Fox, same kind of thing. Like Fox less so because, oh, what good green and black cards are there? So I'm interested if it is like we get all the rulers out of the gate. Like there will be like some supporting cards, but it does sound like with the runes especially, they're trying to make things more generic. And when you do that, you let players have more agency in deck building, and that's like the thing that I'm most excited for.
Well, the other benefit on that axis, like I mentioned earlier, with the extra design space in sets, that lets you put in more generic cards. So, like for example, Lancelot would like the only thing that tied him back, and Lancelot's not necessarily a great example because he was like a little pushed, but the only thing that tied him to the thematic deck he was in back in the day was a creature type. Other than that, he was this aggressive red card with like fire breathing, and he was forced to it, and he like imposed attack restrictions, and that's the kind of card you need enough space to be able to put those in, because it's not really aimed at a specific deck.
Yeah.
And so making like each set less focused on supporting specific rulers gives you more room for cards like that, and like other cards that like I guess more recent cards like that like I guess they have also been build around me stuff would be like the Kaguya's Moonbeam Butterfly. Like that, there have been all kinds of decks trying to use that one, and it's just sort of a generically good card in a couple different colors. I
kind of want to go off on a tangent here, if we don't mind, just because on this subject, I feel like we're at the absolute worst spot in the history of Force Will for like deck building agency, because even in like the Prisia format, it was like, okay, Prisia is the best ruler in the game, so I need to figure out like what Prisia cards I need to put in my Prisia deck. Or it's like, oh, Fox is the best ruler in the game, I need to figure out what cards best support Fox. Now it's just like, oh, Ground and Air Supremacy is the most broken thing that I can do for 1 mana, and I can only play it in Keurig. And oh, the Pathway part is like the second most broken thing I can do for only 1 mana, and the card literally says I have to be Keurig. And maybe you can be Shayla, but that's not something you can do in Forcible. Don't even think about it. So like you're literally like you're just looking for the best cards in the entire game, just like objectively, and then you find these 2 cards and you're like, well, garbage. I guess I have to be Keurig then, because like there's like you have to. It's just like the most efficient thing you can be doing right now. And the deck like builds itself from there.
Right, whole
Yeah,
big
so
squadron.
Yeah, I am excited to see kind of if these 10 rulers with the runes really opens the door for that idea of like there's a lot more creativity that you can have with every single ruler, where it's like, sure, I'm playing this ruler, but because of the runes and the customizations and the fact that the set design was such that it was very open, this one ruler can be played in like 6 different ways. You know, like I'm excited for that to come back. I mean, we've had that idea in the past, right? But in really degenerate ways. So
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, sweet, Reflect Refrain. This ruler can do everything, so therefore there can be a million different Reflect decks. So like that idea of having a million different decks off of one ruler is great, as long as a bunch of different rulers can do that. So I'm for one really hoping that we get to that way. But in terms of like a quiet card acquisition and stuff like that for current players, I think this is really good because of the fact that we have a lot. And I'm noticing it now, specifically with this set, I think, because the ruler kind of restrictions that are coming out of this set with, like, really the only packable ruler is CL, and then, like, you have to buy 3 boxes to get Kaguya. I guess I'm just seeing it more of how much people dislike having to try to pack rulers. Like, it's really, like, it's almost just like people are so upset, like, and it was so weird, right? Because we have this like community outcry where it's like, oh, there's fewer rulers in the set, oh, we're getting fewer rulers per box. And now the company's like, okay, well, you're complaining so much about having to try to pack rulers in boxes, so now we'll just make it so that you can just buy structure decks and get the rulers you want. And like, then I saw people in the community who were like, oh, but we want to pack rulers in the boxes. And I'm like, but you guys have been complaining about trying to pack the ruler you want in boxes for a long time. Like, now you don't have to worry about it. Now you can just go, oh, this is the ruler I want to play, I'm gonna go play it. Like, so for current players at least, I think it's actually gonna be pretty cool, because they're not gonna have to like deal with that as much anymore. Like, they literally can just go, oh, this is the ruler I want to play, I can go buy that structure deck. Like,
so I think part of what you're seeing there is just it's 2 different competing drives for the players, like expressing themselves. So like all the angst you've heard about, like, oh, it's hard to get these rulers and they're expensive and stuff, is all very real, because that's stuff that stops them from playing. But then they have an entirely separate drive, which is sort of the gambling aspect of the game, where it's like, all right, time to crack packs and see what cool stuff I can get. And for the game's pretty much history at this point, the coolest, like, flashiest, like, someone holds it up and shows it off pull has been the rulers, and those have also generally been the money cards. And so it's been that way for so long that the immediate assumption with this announcement for players is that, oh, this means there aren't any money cards in the set anymore. And part of it's just like missing like the way the secondary market has changed, and that like singles prices like for this last cluster have been very different than any of the previous ones. Like, they're not all necessarily expensive, but like there have been actual like uncommons that have gone up to a few dollars. Like plenty of rares have actually held at multiple dollars of value and not just been bulk priced. The full arts have all held some level of value on any at all reasonable card.
I think Faith in the Darkness spiked for some time. Yeah. Like, that was a
And so I think what you'll see, especially, I guess it depends on how the level of distribution of the runes, but either we'll see the runes themselves take over as the ruler pull, and they'll just sort of supplant themselves with like the same level of rarity and the same monetary value, or you'll see the monetary value in the set start to like level out a little bit, and you'll have like specific super rares and stuff that will spike and be like high value cards, but you'll see lots more of the set just like evenly valued but not valueless. It's like they're not like, all right, I've got the ruler and the little support here, and then I just get rid of all the rest of it at super low price because that's not what I was getting this set.
Right.
I'm a big fan of chase cards. I think the chase cards in this set are kind of weak. Like, they're just the full art reprints of full arts from previous sets with like a stamp tacked on or something. Like, but back when the game started, the most, like you were saying, you know, what's the cards that most everyone really is excited to pull out of their packs? So my immediate thought was Booty Cat, you know, back to whatever set it was in Grim Cluster when you had Cheshire Cat.
Priestess Returns.
Yeah, when you had Cheshire Cat in one set, and then the next set you had like an actually upgraded like version of that card, and it's the most expensive card I think in Forcible history, right? Outside of like some Ubers or something. Like, it was $150, $200 for this full art like pantsless Cheshire Cat that like a lot of decks were just like jamming 4 of in the deck. And that would be really cool. Like, imagine if like the flip side of Ray the Black Owl as a chase card had Booty Zero, which we got as a promo from like a year ago. I would buy 10 boxes of this set because I think the card's super fun. It's a good playable card, and then you get you know, scantily clad females, which is what everyone really wants. So I don't want rulers in my sets. I'm of the mindset where like, okay, it's really annoying when I open like 3 boxes of E&W and I get Adelbear, Flute, and I don't know, another garbage ruler, and none of them are Tree 2. So like, even when we only have like right now it's pretty bad because we get like reprints of like Shayla and Kirik from the last couple sets. Like, you got reprints of Gil and Panda when you were looking for like a good ruler, and in the past it was just you had bad rulers instead of reprints. So I want more chase cards as my like box, like what I'm trying to pull. I think that rulers as like a core mechanic to play the game, just get a structure deck if you want to start playing the game, and then boom, you have it and you're good to go. So I think it's a really good decision.
And chase cards are still here. If
But they're they're
in their
weak,
announcement
man.
they state
They're
in their
weak.
announcement they state that they're still going to be X commons, X uncommons, X rares, X super rares, and then question mark.
Yeah.
I think they called them hyper rares or something.
So it says the next set, the first set, New Dawn Rises, 40 commons, 35 uncommons, 25 rares, 10 super rares, and secret rares.
So
Okay.
secret rares, like it immediately like triggered a bunch of players because they're like, oh, now there's going to be cards they can't get there. But like part of that wording is like, in all honesty, syncing up their wording across games, because there are secret rares in the Caster Chronicles, and they are all like alternate art or Ubers of, so like they're like the alternate art
they're
version
the chase
of the
cards.
biggest casters. They're the chase cards, and so that's just a new name they have for chase cards to get their nomenclature the same across all their games. So the chase
Gotcha.
cards are still here.
And we still get buy a box promos. God packs will still exist. And the question becomes, you know, the real big question that a lot of people were having is like, are we still going to see Ubers? And I'm interested to see what happens if we still see Uber rares.
I've been playing this game for 3 years. I have not a single time. I've bought 2 boxes of every set. I have never pulled an Uber rare in my life, so that does not affect me.
I'll
I
hold
just
up. Are
assume
we
it's
supposed
never
to
gonna
count the
happen.
Uber salt? Because I got you topped. I bought minimum of 3 boxes of every set since MPR, and I have not pulled a single Uber.
You got me beat.
So I've been playing since Curse of the Frozen Casket, and I've gotten about 3 boxes per set, and I think I've pulled 4 or 5 Ubers.
All right, I'm done. Goodbye,
Yours-
everyone.
That's it.
It's been a great podcast.
All right, we're taking this podcast outside now.
My language is about to reach levels of profanity that are not here for children's ears, so I gotta go somewhere.
So before we go down that path, let's talk about, Ryan, you kind of talked about, hey, want to get started playing this game, pick up a structure deck. So new players, right? So I think I don't necessarily know if you guys have been following things on the page as much or in your local communities, if there's seen any influx. But as one of the things that I do a lot is kind of peruse the Facebook page, I have been noticing kind of an influx of newer players, people kind of wanting to try to learn more about the game or jumping into it. And with this new cluster and this new kind of structure of product, I'm kind of wanting to know what your guys' thoughts are about how this impacts or could make it easier for newer players to jump into the game.
From a design perspective, this feels almost specifically geared at making trying out the game easier for new players.
Didn't you say that like all of the structure decks could be split into 2 so that like 2 people could play them?
Yeah, exactly. They come with each starter deck is 68 cards, 2 different rulers, 40 main deck cards, which are all 10 play sets, so you can immediately give everybody 2 of each card. 10 runes, 16 magic stones. So can be split into 2, so each player immediately has an 8 magic stone, 20 card main deck, and a ruler to be able to use.
Basically every other card game that is even moderately successful has like 2-player starter decks, because like that's how new players get into the games. I have myself and I have a friend and we both want to try this, so I think that's a huge step in the right direction. Yeah, I think this is just all upside for new players.
I think the other important thing that will go with new players, and this isn't even necessarily all on like, oh, the company needs to do this. This is sort of something the company and the community need to work on. Is this is a good chance to try and draw in new players. Like we haven't had like you said, you were seeing some influx of new players, but we haven't had a big influx in a while. And part of that is just like communities reaching out and growing on their own. And so I don't necessarily have a concrete suggestion as to what we need to do to help this, but it's a good chance for, like, you know, each local community to try and do that.
So, yeah, one of the things that I'm most excited to kind of see, and this comes to we need to understand more what rune cards do, is I would be very interested to see if the 10 rune cards, like, that come in the starter decks is, like, you know, if they're more the ones that sit in the rune deck, and then kind of base what we know on the rune deck. So, like, if within the structure deck itself, the rune cards allow you to, like, do a little bit of weird deck building and experimentation just off of the structure deck, I think that could also be really awesome, because then it also gives players a taste of, like, oh, so this is what it's like to try different things, or oh, this works with this works with this, so they can kind of experiment even within their own. And then they go, well, you want to build this even more? You want to kind of continue to scratch that deck building creativity itch? You can go buy the set. And so it's like a little bit of a seeding people to go buy the set too, which I think is smart.
So from my new player experience is probably different from like a casual player. Like when I'm a new player to a card game, I'm like, all right, how quickly can I learn how to beat everybody at this game? So I recently started playing Lightseekers, and like their structure deck system, like I've played with their structure decks, and then like the difference between their structure decks and their competitive decks is like very, very different gameplay wise. Like just there's so much more going on with like competitive decks because they have a bunch of different effects going on. But like the real thing that I didn't like about getting into the game was just that it's very difficult to know what you're getting when you're buying sealed product. So like when you buy the structure deck, you get like some cards and like your leader or whatever, and then like most of the cards aren't competitively viable. But then if you want to like actually like pull rulers out of a box, like the sets are so insanely large that in order to like get like guarantee that you're going to be getting like certain copies of cards, like you have to buy like 4 boxes or something at like $120 a piece. So it's like it's really fun to like play a new game and then just like build a collection and like buy a couple boxes and open them and like look at all the different cards and just like, ooh, what can I do with these? What can I do with these? And then after that, like go onto the competitive website and be like, all right, what's actually good? So I really like that they're like just making it easier for the structure decks to have guaranteed playable cards, and then also decreasing the size of the set so that like you have like you can buy 3 boxes and just guaranteed have like everything that you need. I think that's really, really good for new players that are coming from other games and immediately want to be a competitive player, which is what I am.
I think the only thing, having been talking about kind of this new direction, and I think we can all agree that there's a lot of really, really excellent things that are coming out of this, both for current players and for players who are getting into the game. I also think this makes it really easy for stores to be able to push the game a little bit easier in terms of, so like if a store wanted to run a demo up to this point in time, right, in the past, they've either had to be self-advocating enough to be able to finally find one of the Peter Pan Captain Hook decks, which to this day I still have not seen the updated one, which removed the regalia and moved the formatting of the cards to the correct formatting. I have still not seen them, though I know they exist, and I reach out a lot. So like it's hard to find those, right? 2, or the store has to like pick 2 of their products off the shelves to crack them open to have 2 structure decks, right? So I think with this, a store can just say, okay, we're gonna order, so of our boxes of structure decks that we're gonna order, we're gonna take 1, we're gonna open it, and it's gonna be the store's structure deck, and that store just only has to set, you know, kind of sacrifice, quote unquote, 1 product to be able to teach players this game, because they can immediately sit down, have 2 little half decks, and go, here you go. and then it's like, oh, do you want to teach this game to your friend? Like, after we've played together? Sweet. You can go buy one of the structure decks and do exactly what we did here. Split it in half and sit down and play it with your friend. I just think it makes for a much more, a much easier process for a store to advocate this game to their players, which I think is definitely a good thing. Because I think if we can get stores and store employees back on top with the direction this game is going, I think that's a really, really, really good thing.
Yeah, I agree.
The one trick that comes with that, though, is Force of Will has to be continuously printing this structure deck. We cannot have any shortages of this product, which I cannot imagine that they're not thinking that and realizing that. But ultimately, we've seen some pretty weird things in the past where you go, but wait, what? This doesn't make sense. But like, I would have to imagine that, especially with the fact that the 10 structure deck rulers are the 10 for the cluster, that this is going to be a product that probably gets re-released pretty consistently, / each new set coming out will at least have an additional print run of the structure decks to go out with it. Because if these structure decks vanish, then we're in a bit of a trouble. But if stores can keep these stocked without having to like hunt and peck and find it down, then I think it's a much better situation.
For sure.
Yep.
So there's the potential pitfalls, at least that I can see. But other than that, I don't really see anything that's like scaring me about this new cluster.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely excited with the direction they're taking it, and especially because I've talked in the past, like, Jeff seems very excited about like the design, like rebalancing or like reforming, with like just having better balance overall. Fingers crossed, hopefully that happens. But you know, that's what I'm excited for.
Right. I mean, to be perfectly honest, I don't. This set didn't give me too much to be like, oh, I'm super scared of green still. Now I'm just super scared of Kieran.
Yeah.
But then again, I've always, in the background, I've always been super scared of red. So I think that's.
I
going
can
back to
join
my
you
primal
on the
roots.
secretly always disliking mono red spectrum.
Yeah, I'm just always like, ugh. I have to be afraid of red constantly, or else I die.
I think
Disclaimer,
last weekend
I still love Kyron Lucas and want him to be just fine. I just don't like playing against mono red too much.
I was watching the MTG Pro Tour the other, I think it was 1 week ago, 2 weeks ago. I'm sure Brandon will be able to tell me.
DC 2 weeks ago, yeah.
That's the one. And I was like watching it, and they were putting a lot of control decks on stream, and I was like, wow, Magic looks really fun right now. Like, maybe that's a game I can get to. And then they break down the top 8, and they were just showing you the control decks. The top 8 was all red decks. I was like, God damn it. What is this garbage? Never mind. No.
Oh, you would have hated the SCG Open that was going on this weekend. The top 4 is all Eldrazi decks. It's no ban list modern though, so it's not like a real format, but it's
interesting.
Pretty ridiculous.
Fun.
That's just also sort of the fallacy with like streaming events, because like we've run into that events as well, as like you don't necessarily want to show what's the most representative match because players don't want to see it. So like
or
during the Fox Prisia meta, like so for example, while streaming Masters, it was specifically avoided ever putting a Fox mirror on stream.
Yep,
until there was
worked
no
really
option.
hard. I worked really hard on that one.
Even though that was probably a third to 40% of the matches that day were Fox mirrors, the players, the viewers just don't want to watch it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, that was the dilemma as we got into the later rounds of the Providence GP, right? Because we were walking in, everyone was walking in all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, ready to see all these exciting Wanderer lists.
Oh, you poor babies.
Like the first 3 rounds, I was like, okay, yeah, this is great stuff. And then I would start finding these other lists, and I'm like, oh, well, they're paired up against Jerry. Oh, well, they're paired up against Keurig. Oh, that person dropped out.
I guess we're putting on a Sherry, man.
I guess we're putting some Sherry's on. Mike Sammartino with his green grim was like the highlight of the entire stream. That moment and the moment between Dylan Hunt and Patrick.
The quadruple thought control
controlled off of the Otherworld Dreams was probably the hypest moments of the entire stream. But it's tricky, and so like I'm also kind of excited for it from a streamer's perspective. One, going into this new meta. Because going into Collinsville, I have no idea. Like, don't get me wrong, Keurig is going to be the most represented. I can't argue that. of looking at cards. I know that Kyric's going to be the most represented, right? But this is a GP with a new ban list in New Frontiers and no major event beforehand. So people are going to be bringing in all kinds of crazy stuff.
So here's my concern, and I don't mean to put myself on a pedestal, but the week before Collinsville is ARG Atlantic City. And I'm terrified that if I play like I'm thinking Scheherazade is pretty strong right now, and I think Brandon expressed before the podcast that he disagrees. But like if I just play Scheherazade at this event and like I do well, like do I just open up everyone to net deck me and then play Scheherazade at Collinsville?
Stop.
Because then I don't want to go to Collinsville. I don't want to play it. I've had 3 months of that. I'm done. I don't want to do that anymore.
Here's the solution.
Come to Collinsville and just stream with me. That's all you have to do.
Hey, don't you chase players out of my event.
That Scheherazade beats that is still good, and then you play that at ARG
there we
Atlantic
go.
City, and then next week you beat everyone with Scheherazade.
There it is.
There we go.
There it is. I'm really, yeah.
Don't net deck me, everyone. I'm going to play something that I already know how to beat, so you can't trust me. Just don't net deck me.
Just don't net deck it. Oh, goodness gracious. So moving on to kind of our next topic from last week that we talked about. There is a lot of different... There's a lot of players, I think, in this game, and I would consider myself to be having had times where this was me and everything else, where players consistently kind of place in this 9th through 12th, 9th through 15th place at major events, right? So they're very, they have skill, they do their play testing, they do that kind of work, but they consistently kind of bubble, right? They can't quite get there. And so Brandon last week mentioned to us that he had some kind of advice for people in that to kind of help them, maybe things to consider to try to push them towards that being able to top 8, being able to get there. And so I kind of want to open the floor to Brandon to share those pieces, and then we'll kind of share our thoughts. So Brandon, the floor is yours.
So this is just a thought that's kind of been bubbling in my head for several months now. It's just I've just always wanted a platform to kind of share it, and so now I have that. So now I'm going to kind of talk about what I see as this player that's right on the bubble that could just be a little bit better, and the biggest problem I tend to see in that player, and I call it the hyperfixation on top decking mentality, or a thought mentality, and it's this idea that top decks exist, which they really don't, and that there's an undue amount of pressure put on the actions that end a game. So like these players will often like have these feel bad stories about like, oh, he top decked this and that's the reason I lost, when that is like so absurdly far from the truth. Like a game is a series of actions that end in one player winning or losing, and you just are looking at the last thing that happened and thinking that decided the whole thing. So like the most classic example is like, I'm at 5 life, he draws a card, casts it, it's lightning strike, I lose. And this player will tend to think like, oh, that it was unpreventable, I couldn't have stopped his draw step, I'm not playing cancel spells, and so there's absolutely no way that could have been prevented. But there definitely is a way that can be prevented, and that's you could have played differently so that you weren't at 5 life to where they could have topped it and killed you. If you had opportunities to make better plays and get the game over quicker, then they wouldn't have had that draw step to beat you. You could have thought about the outs that were in their deck and played to them better so that you weren't in this position. And this idea that this hyperfixation on top decking creates this problem where you are putting the blame on something other than yourself for the outcome of a game, and it is causing you to not learn from them. It's causing you to not think about them in a correct, logical, learning way. And so just think about that the next time that you have this sort of like this sob story where there was just no out, there was no way you could solve it, that nothing could have been done because of the last 1 or 2 turns of a game.
Yeah, I think I can speak to an example where I fell victim to this mentality myself, but then was able to kind of turn it around. And also, weirdly enough, my opponent didn't fall victim to that mentality kind of in the same game, and that was actually this past year at Worlds. So this past year at Worlds, we have the draft section, right? We're in game round 2, and I felt like my draft pod was pretty solid. I was really happy with everything else. And my opponent were playing this really good game. Game 1, I think I took. Game 2, he took. So then we go into game 3. And And so things are kind of playing out, and I can't necessarily remember kind of the track of the game, but I know that in game 2 I had played my Kame, which is the 4-drop demon that steals a 2-drop, and you can like burn it, you know, pay red and sack dude to give it swiftness and like ping your opponent to death and stuff. And I'm kind of sitting on the board, and I'm, you know, the game has definitely gone more so my opponent's favor, right? And I'm like, okay, I'm pretty sure my only out here, like I'm already acknowledging in my head, like I'm pretty sure I've lost this game, but like my only potential out at this point is to get that top deck of Kane. So I'm not like truly like, oh, if only I had, like I'm recognizing that like, yeah, he's really played really well. I probably could have played some things different, but I at least have this kind of backup of Kane. I happen to draw it. I happen to draw into the Kane that last turn. I play it. I go through the plays, and I'm feeling pretty good. But the one card that my opponent saved in his hand, he saved specifically because he knew that my out for that situation was Kane. So like I have to reward my opponent for that. He saved the 2-drop light spell that like makes something a 0/1.
Reduction.
A reduction, right? So like my opponent only had one card left in his hand after establishing this board, and he kind of did what you're saying, Brandon, is he thought about, having seen these other 2 games, looking at the board state, looking at the life total, what is the out that my opponent could have? What is the out that Jeremy could have to win this game? And the out was definitely Kane, and he was prepared for it, and because of that, he won the game. So like massive props to that player. Like I'm not upset. I even say to this day, like he made the absolute right call in saving that card, and he won that game fair and square. But like that was a situation where I could have just as easily like been super salty about the fact it's like, oh, that one card he saved just happened to be the one that kills me, or like, you know, oh, it was, you know, if only I had top decked this instead, or if only if I had done this. Whereas my opponent was like, I'm gonna save this card knowing that this is a potential situation, and so that is what put him ahead. So it's definitely real, that kind of that mentality, and you got to kind of get ahead of it. I would agree.
The TLDR here is top decking doesn't exist, and don't ever blame your game.
Whoa. I mean, let me tell you my story, right? So this is something like, I think that like what separates like a great player from like the top 1% player, which is like the bubble from like the top 8, right, is just your ability to go beyond just like, okay, not only what is in their hand, but what are their outs? What can they even top deck that is going to get me out of the situation? And especially with like the Scheherazade meta that we just had, hopefully don't have anymore, like especially in the mirror, like games would very quickly degenerate down to a low number of cards in hand, and you really were playing around top decks. Like, okay, like how, like what is the worst card my opponent could top deck? Like, what do I need to cancel? What do I need to do? And like playing in the Wanderer event, it was even like accentuated even more because you had so many more cancel spells. And I remember a moment in the finals specifically where, and this is my feels bad complain story, I ended up winning this game, but only because my opponent misplayed. But I've got him down to 0 cards. I just final battled his board and just had him completely wiped, except for he had like one creature that still survived and was able to like threaten lethal. And he top decks Ruin Stories and sacks a Spirit Stone to draw Final Battle. I've got exactly 5 mana, and my only way to stop Final Battle is with the Jupiter in my hand. So he casts Final Battle, I cast Jupiter to cancel it, tapping out, and he has to have exactly the Wall of Wind effect or the cancel spell to make it so that I can't actually cast the Jupiter, cancel the Final Battle, and not lose the game. Luckily, he made a pretty big mistake, which even I missed at first, which is where he used Ruin Stories to flip down his story deck, and he had his lethal creature was a flipped Scheherazade. So because Scheherazade flipped, he can't actually cast the Ruin Stories from the extra deck, and I end up letting my Jupiter cancel the Final Battle, and I can win the game. But like just the fact that the man, like I had him down dead to rights, just did everything that I could, and it does kind of come down to like, you can kind of complain about top decks when you feel like you did play perfectly, and like that's something that like almost justifies it, but still you can't really like credit yourself for playing perfectly all the time. But when like your opponent top decks like 2 top decks in a row, like that's when I get a little bit salty about it.
So we have this I have this experience with a player who pretty much every single time there's this kind of discussion at the end of a game where it's like, well, it's just because you had this card, or it's just because you had this card.
It's like, yeah, that's why I put it in my deck, you know?
It's just because I didn't see these cards. And I'm like, so that argument's invalid because, like, I know that this is a good card to save to use against you, right? So, like, I'm playing to my outs here, and I know that this is a card that I need, and so I'm going to find the opportunity to find it. So it's not that it's just because I have that card. Well, I have this card because I know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, like, I think you have to... I think there's a difference, I think, between, like, being salty, right? Which I think in your situation, right, Ryan, in that situation, if he had made the right call, right, you definitely could have felt salt.
I would have...
You definitely could have felt salt, and, like, that salt is real. Like, that's real disappointment, right? Knowing that you've kind of played perfectly, and sometimes it just happens that way in the weirdest situations. Ultimately, though, you cannot get into the habit of, like, blaming... like Brandon, like you said, like blaming the outcome of a game on a top deck, like, or like giving your opponent complete control of the outcome of a game in that regard, right?
Yeah.
Like, there are definitely things that you can do before then that your opponent is also probably doing beforehand to, like, push the game more towards your favor in that direction, right? So, like, the flow of who's at the idea of who's at advantage, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you're trying to gain advantage, like that back and forth, that flow of who has advantage is constantly moving during the game, and there are things that you can do, small interactions throughout the game that you can do to push the advantage in your favor. And I think sometimes there are just players who maybe need to take some more time to think about that. Like, what are the ways, how can I be playing, how can I be analyzing in such a way that I find more of those moments to push the advantage in my favor?
Just like on the flip side of this, in the same match, like at the end of game 2, like, just like as a general rule, how much I think about, like, the top decks my opponent can find and, like, how I'm always able to play around them. When I was, like, making my game-winning turn, like my tournament-winning turn of the GP, I flipped Scheherazade and put a Gretel on top of his deck. He has 0 Spirit Stones available to him, and I spent, like, 6 minutes in the tank thinking about what he could top deck that could get him out of the situation, because I just completely forgot I put Gretel on top of his deck. Like, I'm just that, like, focused on, like, okay, how do I lose? Like, literally all 55 cards, his main board and sideboard, what could be on the top of the deck, how do I lose? And then he draws a turn, shows me the Gretel, I'm like, oh yeah, I put that there.
To
okay.
be more semantically clear here, just so the semantics line up here. When I say top decking isn't real, I don't mean that people don't draw cards off the top of their deck, because they do every turn. What I mean is that top decking as a excuse for how a game turned out is not real. Like, there's no
Correct.
So, like, everyone thinks about, like, what they could possibly quote top deck unquote, but that's not what I'm talking about.
Right. Yeah,
You're not always playing
think...
around the cards that, like, you know that they have or even think they have. You just, like, you have a picture of the 40 cards in their deck, and you're saying, okay, how can I play around all these cards? Not just because, like, it's what they're going to have or what they're going to top deck. It's just because, like, it's good strategy to play the game.
One thing I would also note, like, it goes even... I guess it goes... There's another aspect to it that's different than that, and, like, this one is sort of apparent to anyone who's, like, played or watched enough of, like, Magic's Modern, and that sometimes what looks like luck is simply a certain percentage that a deck can do things. So, like, anyone who's watched Modern, all of the top Modern decks have a certain, like, subset of opening hands that are just nigh unbeatable, and every one of them just has a certain percent chance to hit that. And so they're... part of the top decking mentality that I've seen is, like, something like, oh, this was unbeatable, but it's so unlucky. And it's like, no, that's going to happen in X percentage of games, and you have to account for that as you're, like, choosing decks.
Right. Yeah, one of the things that I have been talking to a friend of mine who we're talking about trying to help him be better at the game is, I'm like, well, when you're making a decision about what line of play to take or, like, when an action is to take, the question, and this is kind of how I approach it, right? The question I ask myself is, if I make this play, what is the worst possible outcome, right? And if I can figure out, you know, based on what I know from my opponent's deck, based on what I know of the field state, based on what I know of what they might draw, right? So what's the worst possible outcome if I were to make this play? If the worst is that I end at advantage, then I'm like, okay, that seems like it's probably a good option, right? And I also do the same. I also do the same thing when I'm analyzing my opponent's plays, and I'm like, if they're making this, and maybe this is just giving, you know, all the people that I've ever played too much credit or whatever. You know, I always try to be respectful and assume that the person I'm playing against has some skill. So, like, if they're making this play, what are they thinking is the worst possible situation? and do they feel prepared for it, right? You know, so it's like, and then am I prepared to answer that back, right? So I see like a card getting played. I'm like, okay, if they're playing this when this is the field state, they must have something to kind of back it up. Can I answer the backup? Yes. Okay, well then I'm going to punish it, right? As a, you know, you kind of have to go like 3 steps deep, I think, a little bit in terms of like how deep you have to go with your play lines. And I think if you can do that more and more and more, then I think when those top decks happen, you know, where they draw a card and it happens, right? Then you can be like, oh, well, it doesn't sting as much because you're just like, well, there's an X percentage of times where that could have happened, and I'm not ashamed of the play line I did up to this point. And you kind of help keep yourself protected from that hyper fixation on, oh, it's just because you top decked this card. And it's like, no, it's really not. I played a longer game than just one card.
There you go.
Maybe shifting gears a little bit, but like my own personal bit of advice that might not necessarily hit with all players, but there's definitely a good percentage of players that fall into this trap, is that during the preparation phase, as you're like practicing, tuning your deck for an event, like just figuring out where you stand, a lot of players fall into the trap of not practicing against the known, like against their known information. So like you think that you have your own custom deck that has a good shot, but then you end up spending all of your time practicing against your friends who also have their own custom decks and only devote, say, 10% of your time to actually trying out against Sherry or against Kirik. And there are a lot of players that run into this, and like this was something that I fell into when I was first starting the game. Was just like, oh, just be practicing with my friends and we'd all be using the decks that we had, and so you'd end up with incorrect deck choices based on building like niche decks that you have to be that are incredibly unlikely to run into, and just like a complete lack of experience and correct deck choices, like because you just like didn't practice against the current best deck enough.
Yeah.
But
Agreed.
The problem is like doing so requires you to either build or proxy up and then play as the best deck against your friends and then get them to do the same against you. And so it requires this step of effort that just a lot of people don't want to do, but it is vital to actually properly testing.
Right. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of little pieces, but I hope that for those of us who are listening kind of heard the insight of 4 people who have all qualified for Worlds over this past 3 seasons, and kind of our viewpoints on how to get to that level, how to take it to the next level so that you're not bubbling anymore, you are doing the topping, and that you can kind of take that back to your playtesting and your deck building and your consideration and kind of learn from it. It's kind of the whole purpose of the Teacher's Lounge, and I think I stand for the rest of us when I say that we hope that you learned something from that. So to real quick, I have 2 kind of topics that I'd like to kind of talk about, and then we do have our topic for next time that we'll kind of touch base on. So real quick, just to go around the circle, we've talked about how this format, with the new ban list, everything else, is potentially going to open things up really wide, except for the creation of Kirik. So I'll say real quick, 2 decks that you are interested in playing, not necessarily having to be hyper competitive, and let's exclude like traditional red-green Kirik. So don't even really need to necessarily go into kind of why you're excited about it, unless you want to give like a quick summary, but like 2 rulers, like 2 decks that you're like interested in playing into this new format. So Ryan, you want to go first?
I do not.
Okay, Brandon, you want to go first?
Sure.
I'll find one, don't worry.
I'd like to start with saying that Kirik is certainly the boogeyman of the format, but I don't think it's unbeatable. Like, not
right,
even
I agree.
close.
I agree.
Like,
I'm just trying to kind of
not like Scheherazade. But anyway, so I mentioned it last week, but Phaley combo is a pet deck of mine that I absolutely adore, and I think it got a lot better this set. I got a lot better with Scheherazade not being around, so I've played a lot of that already in testing, and I'm pretty happy with it. So
Okay.
and we'll see, you know, if what it can and can't beat, but I think the deck is just a ton of fun. Go to Jeremy's channel and look at it if you haven't already seen Clone Combo, because it's ridiculously fun.
Yeah, it is really ridiculous. Nothing says satisfying like making 4 blazers at the beginning of your opponent's turn.
Right. And then the second deck I think that is competitive is, I think, Gil, the Gifted Conjurer, the green one. That deck was already pretty decent beforehand, and then kind of Scheherazade came along and did a lot of what that deck was doing, just better. It got a fair amount of decent support in this last set, and the deck was already really good. So hopefully we'll see that come together and be insane. It also uses Lorite better than everyone else, and so that'll be fun.
Yeah. And Frank?
My front runner for this is one I'm not going to mention here because I practiced it or I played it at locals this weekend, so I could ride on it next week. So we're going to go with my second and third places. Sorry.
That's fine.
So my second place is simply Imul again. Imul, black, white, green Imul is what I took up to Minneapolis. It was a ton of fun. It does everything I like to do. And so I've been bouncing between, like, I haven't gotten a ton of testing with new lists in yet, but I've been bouncing between green, white, blue Imul and green, white, black Imul again. Just playing with some of the new cards, like the green, white, blue wanting me to get access to Dawn to the Earth and the Diversity Town Light Palace.
Yeah.
And then the black, white, green just being like all of the great black, white, green cards plus Ray filling in the 2-drop I did not have up at Minneapolis. Like when I was up there, the biggest like gap I felt in the deck was just like I have plenty of great 1-drops I want to play. I have an amazing number of great 3-drops, and I have nothing I want to do it to. Like even compared to decks I've played that have like 1-drop ramp like Sacred Elf, where you intentionally leave 2 a little bit light, I was just like, all of my 2-drops are garbage, and I hate that fact. And so I have that now in that deck. But then my second pick, kind of like I mentioned last week, is just Big J Ruler. I want to play a deck that plays a combination of Flourishing Hope, Arrival of the Hero, and Resuscitating Will. And my current front runner for that is Black, White, Green Rhea, honestly. You get, like, Rhea is already at 12-12, which is, I believe, 3rd or 4th place in body size for current J Rulers. She has built-in flying, and so from there she doesn't take a whole lot to close the game on her own. She is a respectable clock on her own. And then around her you have Discard, you have Glint of Insight, you have these incredibly hard to deal with threats because you have, like, between Red and Grim, you have cards that have barrier against 3 different colors, and it's most of the removal in the format.
Yep.
And so I just want to play Rhea at, like, but not like full control. I want to flip on 3 or 4 stones pretty much every game, and then I want to start hitting in the face while you're out of cards.
There you go. I think for me, I mean, I talked it to death last time, but I'm very excited to play a little Sherry Doll control. Specifically, like, it's not tempo, it's not aggro, like, it is like, let's play this long grind game, and I'm just gonna say, okay, well, now you have nothing, I've got a million things to answer whatever you play, I'm gonna just start beating you over the face with 11-11s. So that's really exciting for me. I'm really excited to see how the deck plays without access to Ruin Stories, like how I even like build my deck differently, or how I actually make use of the extra deck differently in games without Ruin Stories, like knowing that each of these is probably going to be like a one-time use. I think that's going to be just fun to kind of play around with. And then the other deck that I'm building because I kind of have to for the channel, because I'm sure a bunch of people are looking at it, and it kind of terrifies me, is just Keurig all-in combo.
Oh my god. Are you talking about Umir?
Yeah, so that deck... So no. So as someone I've built the rough draft of it, and if your opponent does not have Lightning Cave or Lorite, when you play the Epic Knights cheat-in spell for Umir, if your opponent doesn't have one of those 2 cards, they lose the game. Yep. 100% of the time.
That
like
happens.
You have to
Foresight.
have one of those 2 cards, or you lose. If I resolve that spell into Umir, you will 100%. You will take 11,000 damage plus on that.
What about
turn.
Dawn of the Earth? Come on, man.
What about Amaterasu's Foresight?
I was like, Dawn of the Earth, Fog.
I guess I'm not. I'm not considering those because of the fact that I'm considering how early the game
Rachel
is.
Smile wrecks you.
We're talking about resolving this card on
playing
turn 3,
Bahamut,
right?
then Meditation wrecks you.
I'm mainly talking about like the fact of this deck like, I guess I'm really saying this on turn 3. Like, if it resolves it on turn 3 or turn 2, because any deck, that deck, the longer the game goes, the worse it is for that deck anyway. But, like, if that deck does what it's supposed to do, and just kind of, like, on turn 2 on the draw, or on turn 3, resolves that spell, and you don't have any kind of, if you can't stop Umir, ta-da, you're dead.
So the only thing that really worries me about that deck, because I've had locals who've been playing the Umir combo decks for forever. Like, I've been dealing with them since before ADK came out.
Right.
And so the thing that scares me about that deck relative to any time in the past is not like how fast it can go, but the problem is that it gets to play so many less dead cards. Like, every previous version had to play a certain number of libraries and etc., and these are all cards that you absolutely never want to draw. Like, you load your deck with about 60% cards that are just awful to draw, and Keurig gets to replace part of those with piggies and stuff, and so that's what actually scares me about the Keurig version.
Right, because that deck is playing, in terms of Keurig cards, the deck plays Pig, 2-drop Pig, and Pae Ellie. And you could probably play Pig Squadron, I guess, if you don't want to play Shooting Star. But the other card that it gets is Shooting Star. And I play Shooting Star just so you have this 4 grand of protected damage. But yeah, it's a little insane. And I talked to Paul about how I'm really excited for Lapis to, and we can kind of go into, that's our fun topic, is what card that we're excited to have leave. And what cloud, that kind of stuff. But yeah, those are my 2 decks that I'm currently building and I'm kind of interested in. Ryan, we gave you a lot, of time, bud. Do you think you got a couple for us?
All right. So my pet project that I've been working on, really excited for, is the same thing that Frank said, the green, white, black Imul. But something I'm really excited for there is something that we didn't have at all in the Scheherazade meta, because it was a Scheherazade meta, and it's side decking rulers.
Yeah.
So the Imul deck, this green, white, black control deck, I'm messing with what ruler I want to be game 1. And Imul's the farthest away from the other 3 that I have on this list of cool rulers. I think Zero's really cool right now, because you get Zero's Magic Light, which means you get to play 8 Miscalculation instead of 4 Miscalculation, and that's just pretty good against Keurig, because it beats Play Dead. It's just more anti-aggro stuff and removal. But the deck kind of has a problem with finding card advantage, which makes it weaker against the controller decks. Rhea is another one. If I want to be game 1 Rhea and then side into Zero or Imul to beat Powerless Dragonoid, that's a pretty cool idea, I think. And also has a lot of the similar cards. So you just take your 4 Zero's Magic Light and then their 4 Sword of the New Moon, and then you just have some other mystery related cards. And a lot of the mystery cards are just kind of good on their own, even without the Mystery Awaken, Glint of Insight. So you can just have that in your Rhea deck, and then when you side into Zero or Imul, you still just have Glint of Insight in your deck. And the third ruler, this was inspired by Brandan Bremont, actually, is Yogg-Sothoth, the leader of 1,000 Keys, or whatever the hell he's called.
Oh goodness.
No, but I mean, I don't know what he's good at deck. I assume he would only be specifically good against Lumia style decks, where they kind of go wide with low cost resonators. But that's good. You could side into Yogg-Sothoth. You don't need Zero's Miscalculation, because
How
the Lumia
exactly
decks
did I inspire this, or is that
No, I was kind of thinking about it, but my brother posted a thing on the US group where he was hey, when you guys are asking for advice on casual decks, how much of a dick do you want me to be, was the gist of the post. And then Brema was I want a super GP competitive Yogg-Sothoth leader of 1,000 Keys deck, and I was actually, I'm kind of messed around with it. It's an option as a side deck ruler. Maybe it doesn't make the final cut, but that's I like decks where you get a side deck rulers and just blow people out of the water. The first GP I won was a Reflect Refrain Necrolance deck. Woo, how creative. But against Alice's World, I sided into Kane, and the look on people's faces when they were suddenly getting face down with a 7/7 with swiftness on turn 2, and I was killing their Gwybers with multiple Levitines for 1 mana. They were oh shit, and it was a fun time. Then another deck I'm looking at right now that I'm kind of interested in is something I haven't put a whole bunch of time into, but once again, my blood brother has recommended that he's working on it. It's Alhamat, actually. And it's
Ancient Magic Alhamat?
Yeah, and it's
Okay.
abusing ancient magics with Welser, and trying to cheat out Welser, and then double World Flame summoning you, double Ancient Knowledge, that kind of stuff.
Oh, that'd be
or double
interesting.
Conjure Time Bomb.
That'd
And
be
that's
cool.
like that idea a lot. I think it's kind of like you're black-white because you play your Ancient Magic Stone, and you can like play other white stones, so you do have access to like the anti-aggro tools like Miscalc, so you can have like a good aggro matchup and stuff like that, which I think is like.
But then you're also red for Welser, right?
Yeah, so you're black-white-red, and then you get your Ancient Magics, your red stuff, your white stuff, your black stuff, discard
package.
Your black-red cheating, your Welser spell, that kind of stuff. You know, so when you get your God Art Lorided, that kind of stuff.
Rachel also says Cobblestone, kill a
Yep.
pig.
Yep. Rachel's like those like kill 2-drop cards are suddenly very, very relevant. So like yeah, definitely Rachel for sure. Valentina is something that's like on my radar like as a general deck building thing. Maybe not for like this all Hamat deck that I'm thinking of, but like killing 2-drops is a good thing to do in Forcible right now.
I'm excited to go back to an era where maybe we can actually play 4-drop Resonators.
Oh, what a world. What a world. But yeah, so those are the two kind of ideas I've been floating around. Black, white, red, all Hamat, and then black, white, green, 4 different ruler sideboard option.
Yeah, I think that's pretty sweet. Awesome. So as our... Oh, by the way, I do have the results of our poll from last week before we get this week's silly fun.
Viewers are all uncompetitive, casual, filthy animals.
So, overwhelmingly, the victor of last week's poll was Space Time Anomaly for Brandon.
I didn't actually know it was a competition.
So, congratulations, Brandon. You get the unofficial Ruler School. You won the poll crown, I guess.
I didn't know it was a competition, because if it was, I would have told you all that you had no chance. I mean, Space Time Anomaly, like, that's gotta be the crowd favorite.
I would have told myself I had no chance. I didn't know it was a competition.
Exactly, so, for this
I can't
week,
believe I lost a glimpse of Kaguya. That's my problem.
Hey, so for this week, you know, we do have rotation coming up in a few months, and Lapis Cluster had a lot of stuff in it. So I'm ignoring, for the sake of the questions, we're ignoring Severing Winds and we're ignoring Final Battle. But the first question is, what card are you going to miss the most from Lapis Cluster? And then the second question being, what card are you absolutely glad is gone from Lapis Cluster? Again, no Severing Winds and no Final Battle, because those are obvious for both of those answers for many a reason. I will go ahead and go first for mine. I think the card that I am going to miss the most from Lapis Cluster is Dawn of the Earth. Simply because we didn't... And I say this because we didn't get to use that card enough. And I thought it was such a cool card, and it had so many cool pieces to it, and like, so I'm really sad that I didn't get more of a chance, more of a viable chance to be able to use that in New Frontiers, and so that's what makes me sad there. But what card I'm absolutely glad is gone from New Frontiers is Umir. I want him dead. I want that card gone so bad, and so I'm those kind of explosive, hey, look at me, 1 2 3, like I get 3 cards for a bunch of will, but like with cheat-in combo decks and stuff, I've never really liked playing against those kinds of decks. Even when I play them, I feel really scumbaggy, and so I'm really glad to see Umir gone. So those are my two. So Dawn of the Earth because I didn't get to use it enough effectively, and then Umir because I don't like those kind of decks.
Dibs. I'm in next.
You go.
Go for it.
So my honorable mention on cards I'm sad to see go is Lumia. I just wanted to state that there's at least one person who's actually sad to see her rotate. But my pick for card that I'm sad to see go is Kaguya's Moonbeam Butterfly. It does everything I like to do. Like, it lets you do cool toolboxy stuff. Even if it's against conventional wisdom, I'm pretty sure I've run every number between 1 and 4 in a deck. Like, it gets scoffed at that you play 4 or you play none, but the first one doubles every card in your deck, and that's something that no other number does. But, like, it enables you to do a lot of cool toolbox stuff. It made a bunch of other cards, like, suddenly relevant. Like, the scenario where I actually want to play Grim the Rightful King is pretty narrow, unless, oh look, I have this cool toolbox card that lets me get to use him. And then all of a sudden, he's a viable card. Like, this card let me play so many different things that I would otherwise never have played, like, never have played, or, like, have played a little bit and then left behind.
Fair enough.
And then my card I am glad to see go is Yggdrasil, Malefic Verdant Tree.
Oh, you stole mine.
Sorry. So, in addition to just, like, I'm not really an aggro player, so the fact that all of a sudden it's 60 I have to beat is not generally the problem, but, like, this thing just, like, wrecks so many, like, layers of game plans. Like, oh, you can't gain life. So, like, just, like, randomly, like, every once in a while, it's like, oh, I just want a bit of incidental life gain. It's like, none of that. And then it splits all of your, like, damage-dealing stuff. Like, oh, were you dealing damage? Then it's milling them and possibly filling them with stuff. Did something you do happen to cause loss of life? Cool, that was a resource they were using anyway. You just denied them a little bit of mana. And so, like, just, like, it divided this game to this weird thing where you had to play, like, you had to play almost, like, perfectly if it wasn't a deck that was just already good against it, and it was just annoying. Like, it's not necessarily a card I'm not saying it shouldn't have been printed. I'm just glad that I won't have to play against it again.
Fair enough. Brandon or Ryan, who wants to go?
I'll take mine. So on honorable mentions, it feels dumb to say a ruler, so I'm gonna put the Green Dragon from Vingolf on my honorables, because I just always felt like I always read that card and think like it should have been better than it was, and then it just kind of never had a deck. And then Flute is the other one that's honorable. Like, I'm sad to see it go because I feel like with more time it might be good, because I just read that ruler and think it should be good. But my real card is going to be Phaley, for one of two kind of diverging reasons. If the Phaley combo deck never actually gets good, then I think that's a bitter shame, because I think that card is cool and I really wish it was good. And if that deck is good, then I want to play it forever, and I'm going to be very sad when it rotates. So Phaley's the answer to that. And the card that I'm most excited to see
anytime we
go...
do one of these fun questions, like, I want to just, like, take bets ahead of time on what Brandon's card is going to be, because I have 100%, like, guessing rate so far. I need to start getting it out ahead of time.
Would you like to guess what the card I'm most excited to see go is?
I didn't think that far ahead, but I knew you love Phaley. I knew that was going to be it. I mean, it was going to be Verdant Tree from what I'm hearing, but I can't think of an actual...
It was going to be. My card is a Hoser card that I'm excited to see go, if that helps you at all.
Is it?
Bear Magic?
No, it's Shackles. So I'm excited to see Shackles rotate.
Ooh.
Because not even that it's particularly good, right? Like, it was like moderate against Scheherazade. I just think that card sucks. Like, it's really stupid that there's just a 1-mana card that can shut down entire decks. Like, I want to play, I mean, obviously Mikage's rotating, but I want to play things like that and not just worry about a 1 blue sideboard card that, like, can shut down an entire ruler. I think it's unfair.
I should have thought about your love for Mikage. It didn't go that deep, unfortunately.
So Ryan, what about you?
So I'm gonna try and remember the entire name. It's something about a Supreme Blade. The card I want to see
Sylvia
go
Blade
most.
of the Supreme King.
That's
Sylvia.
the one, dude. Absolutely disgusting card. Like, just take a red deck and give it some more reasons to be green. Like, just 2 mana 6/6 is perfectly good for a vanilla stat line with swiftness, and then you give it this effect that just makes it so you can't play like anything but a control deck to like beat aggro. Like, I can't
Is
play...
this your card you're missing, or your?
Oh,
card
it's a card I want to see gone. Absolutely.
Oh, okay.
Card that he's glad to see go.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because like when I want to play Lumia, like when I want to play like this like cool City of Verdant Green Ataraxia Rachel deck, like when you're an aggro deck, I just want to throw out some Tamas and some birds that are in my deck because they're supposed to be there, and I want to chump block your guys so I'm not taking damage and I can take control of the mid game. But when you play this goddamn card and you just oh, my little guy can't block, I can't do anything about it, and then like, oh my goodness, it's just the most frustrating card to play against because it doesn't impact aggro's already good matchup against control. It impacts aggro's matchup against the deck that should be able to beat it, which is like a mid-range deck, and it just completely tips it in aggro's favor whenever they see this card. Absolutely hate it. So glad it's finally gone. And then for the card that I want, that I'm gonna miss the most, like, I don't really know if we're picking rulers or picking banned cards, but like the one I'm gonna miss the most is Captain Hook. He was too short for this world. I don't even think he should have been banned when he was. I think it was like mostly because Fair could like play him on turn 2 or something. That's fine. That's not a big deal. But like he's what I want out of cards that cost 5 mana. And like Forcible has been so afraid to print powerful, like strong enter effects that like can actually take advantage of like cards that, like, the Umer combo deck is revolving around that black-red card that I can't remember the name of, right?
Epic Story for the 1,000.
Epic Story of something. So, like, I want cards that I can cheat enough of Epic Story, or, like, cheat enough of Dark Revolution, or End of Days, and things like that. And there was Griffin, there was Captain Hook, and then everything else is just, like, medium to subpar. And, like, Umer is really good if you build your deck around him, I guess. And like finally we get Welser, which I think is like pretty powerful with that kind of stuff, but like Captain Hook was the OG, like, cheat this guy in before turn 5, and then you're going to have a good time. But since he's banned, my other card would be Kaguya 4. I'm going to miss Kaguya 4 a lot. I think that Brandon and Frank would both agree. It's just
I
like,
thought you were going to say Millennia Bond, so I think that's close. I feel close on what I would have guessed.
yeah. Just like, I've always wanted to like play Kaguya 4. There's always some stupid goddamn aggro deck just like completely keeping it out of the format. But like, ever since Kaguya 4 was even spoiled, I was just like, oh man, like this seems super good. You just like play these like these 12 cards that seem useless, but they're actually win condition. You get to draw cards, you get to produce mana. You're in good colors. Like, this is gonna be an insane ruler, and it just never ever happened. And I've played against it in tournament twice actually, and the first time I played against it was at ARG Nationals against Nate Setinary, and this man just dodged Prisya all day, and I'm on my winning in with Tree, and he's playing Kaguya 4, and I think that's like an unwinnable matchup, and it felt terrible. But then I beat it at Worlds actually, so that was pretty cool. But I've always wanted to play it and never had the balls, so I'm gonna miss it.
You have a locals, right?
I mean, so like my locals is like
People
the
who
world champion and
just
the
ask
world
Aaron what to
champion's brother and people that play test with the world champion. So it's relatively competitive, I would say.
Yeah, but like, so like, understand, like, maybe not quite that high, but at my locals we have 4 different people who've qualified for Worlds, and we have like a half dozen people who are on one of the game's competitive teams. Like, my locals gets very competitive at times. I'm just telling you, take it to locals 1 week. You have to convince yourself that you don't care if you end up going 1-4 during that locals week, but do it. It's worth it, I promise.
I like winning though, but yeah.
Sometimes you just gotta sacrifice it.
I guess it's another piece of advice I would give to anyone is also learn to occasionally have fun when you take a risk and don't win. Because
that's fair.
Yeah, that's
like,
fair.
you narrow yourself so much if you have to win every time.
Right.
This is why I'm getting into epic stories.
That's why I don't bring sideboards to locals.
Oh, what?
It's because I record stuff for the channel, so it doesn't really necessarily make sense.
It doesn't right now, but we should have an entire episode discussing sideboards.
Well, 'cause I'll just say really quickly, it doesn't really make sense necessarily for me to be bringing sideboards to locals, because locals is primarily where I record for the channel, right? So my locals doesn't typically build what meta looks like. So if I was to build a sideboard for a deck that I'm bringing for the channel, I would gear it towards my local meta, which would mean that either it would be sideboard cards that I wouldn't advocate people play, or it would be cards that people would be like, why are you even playing this? So I just save myself the time, and I'm just going to go in with a 40-card deck and have some fun. But
we should definitely make sideboards a topic for like at least a half episode at some
Yeah, we can talk about that.
So much
we can
to
talk
say on sideboards.
We can talk about that next week along with our other topics. So I think
Sounds
we can
good.
talk about that for sure. So again, to go around the room, just because again we want to see kind of who you agree with most, or you think who you side with the most, I guess, for this week's. What card are you excited to see, and what card are you wanting to see, sad to see go? So for me, it was Dawn of the Earth. I'm sad to see it go, and Umir, I'm glad to see it gone. Frank.
Kaya's Moonbeam Butterfly goes into the arms of the angels, and Angry Verdant Tree gets kicked out the front door.
Brandon.
Phaley gets soft kisses, and Shackles of Ice gets punched in the face.
And Ryan.
Sylvia can die in a fiery red-green hell, and Captain Hook will always be my captain.
So there you have it, guys. Go to the Ruler School Facebook page, Forcible Ruler School, and let us know which one of us you side with the most, and we'll kind of come back and see who. Apparently, this has become a competitive thing. Who can take the crown for next week's conversation? Speaking of next week's conversation, we'll be talking about a little bit about sideboarding, because that seems to be a conversation that we could be passionate about, as well as looking at what does a 1 deck versus a 2 deck versus a triangle of decks format kind of look like, and kind of as we go into this openness, what we kind of think this format might look like. But until next time, it has been a wonderful conversation with all of you, and we'll see you next week. And this is Jeremy Franklin, Ryan Miles,
Ha-hoo!
Brandan Bremont,
See ya.
and Frank Klosser.
Oh yeah.
And we'll see you guys next week. Have a good night.